In today's video, we examine what happens when classic Karens meet nature's deadliest predators, from a woman who demanded VIP treatment at a lion exhibit only to become the main course, to a PTA president who thought park rules didn't apply to her until an alligator proved otherwise. But first, let's look at a case where arrogance turned into something no amount of complaining could fix. It was July 8th, 2015. And the afternoon heat shimmered across the walkways of a safari park, a mid-sized wildlife facility in Southern California, where Patricia Holbrook was about to discover that some complaints end in blood. Patricia Holbrook, 52, was a successful real estate agent who had built her career on one simple principle. She always got what she wanted. She didn't tolerate incompetence and measured her worth by how quickly people responded to her demands. What Patricia didn't understand was that nature operates by different rules, ones that don't care about customer satisfaction or social status. Patricia had purchased premium VIP tour tickets for herself and her 16-year-old daughter, Emma. The tour was marketed as an intimate experience limited to 12 guests, offering close-up observation opportunities unavailable to general admission visitors. Patricia saw this as money well spent. Not for education, but for bragging rights and social media content. The group arrived at the African lion habitat around 2:30 p.m., where tour guide Michael Torres began explaining lion social structure and conservation efforts. The facility housed 6 lions, including Achille, a 450-pound male, and 5 females in a large enclosure separated from visitors. Park protocols were explicit. Guests must remain on designated viewing platforms. Photography was permitted without flash, and no attempts to touch or feed the animals were allowed under any circumstances. Patricia immediately interrupted Michael's presentation, loudly complaining that the viewing angle didn't offer good photo opportunities for her Instagram account. She demanded that Michael reposition the entire group or allow her closer access to the barrier. When Michael politely declined, citing safety regulations, Patricia's demeanor shifted to outright hostility. The situation escalated when Patricia stepped off the designated viewing platform, while Michael was answering another visitor's question. She walked past the outer standoff rail and positioned herself directly against the inner barrier, a reinforced panel with a narrow keeper access gap at one end, designed for staff to pass feeding equipment through. Michael noticed immediately and called out for her to return, explaining that the area beyond the standoff rail was strictly off-limits. Patricia ignored him. She told herself the gap was small, that the lion was resting 20 feet away, and that she just needed one good shot. She extended her iPhone through the keeper access gap, angling for a close-up. The shot wasn't good enough. She leaned further in, her shoulder pressing against the gap, her phone hand reaching deeper into the restricted space. When her daughter called from the platform for her to come back, Patricia didn't even turn around. What Patricia didn't appreciate, what most people standing outside a lion enclosure never fully internalize, is that African lions are not simply large cats. They are apex ambush predators, capable of covering 30 feet in under a second, with forepaws that can generate enough force to collapse a zebra's spine on contact. Michael radioed for security and began walking toward Patricia, telling her this was her final warning. He never finished the sentence. Achille crossed the 20 feet in seconds. The lion's paw drove through the keeper access gap with full force, but Patricia had leaned so far that it wasn't her arm that took the blow. The claws connected with her neck and upper shoulder, the hooked grip pulling her violently sideways into the barrier. Patricia made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, something shorter, cut off, before her legs gave out beneath her. Michael ran forward shouting and waving his arms while other staff arrived with air horns. The first radio call overlapped with another channel, costing a few seconds that felt much longer before the right team was dispatched. They discharged the horns repeatedly. Achille backed away. Patricia was on the ground, unresponsive. The wound at her neck was bleeding heavily, the kind of blood loss that doesn't wait. Staff applied emergency pressure dressings immediately, but the damage was severe. A claw had torn through the tissue along the side of her neck, compromising major vasculature. By the time paramedics arrived, she had lost consciousness, her breathing shallow and irregular, her pulse weak and fading. She was transported to the nearest trauma center, but the blood loss had been too rapid and too significant. Patricia Holbrook was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. She was 52 years old. Patricia's sense of entitlement had cost her everything. But what happened when another woman decided that national park regulations were just suggestions and chose the worst possible location to prove her point was a different kind of violent. It was August 19th, 2016, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the picnic areas of Grand Teton National Park, where Diane Crawford was about to learn that some rules exist for reasons more serious than bureaucratic convenience. Diane Crawford was a 47-year-old marketing executive from Denver who had built her identity around knowing her rights and refusing to be intimidated by what she called overzealous authorities. Her social media was filled with complaints about park rangers, restaurant staff, and anyone else who attempted to enforce rules she found inconvenient. On August 19th, Diane was vacationing with her husband Robert and their 2 children at String Lake, a popular day-use area known for frequent grizzly bear activity. Park signage throughout the area clearly warned visitors about active bears and mandated strict food storage requirements. All food, coolers, and scented items must remain in bear-proof containers or locked vehicles when not actively being consumed. The Crawford family arrived at their reserved picnic site around 11:30 a.m. Diane immediately unpacked an elaborate spread of sandwiches, fruit, chips, sodas, and a birthday cake, setting everything across the picnic table while completely ignoring the bear-proof storage locker 20 feet away. When Park Ranger Jessica Martinez approached during routine patrol and politely requested that Diane store the food properly, Diane's response was hostile. She informed Jessica that they were having a picnic, that there were picnic areas for eating, and that she had paid for park access. When Jessica explained that the family wasn't currently eating, the children were playing near the lake, Robert was photographing, Diane became increasingly aggressive. She accused Jessica of harassing paying visitors instead of doing her actual job. The confrontation escalated when Jessica mentioned the possibility of a citation. Diane pulled out her phone, began recording, and demanded Jessica's badge number. Even when Jessica's supervisor arrived and offered to help transfer the food to the bear locker, Diane refused. The Rangers eventually left after documenting the violation, warning Diane one final time. Her response was dismissive. She claimed she had been camping for 20 years without seeing a bear. At 1:15 p.m., a female grizzly bear with 2 cubs emerged from the tree line approximately 80 yards from the Crawford picnic site. What most people don't fully understand about a female grizzly with cubs is that she isn't simply protective, she is operating on a hair trigger. Grizzly bears can weigh up to 400 pounds and run 35 miles per hour, faster than any human alive. Their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a bowling ball. Robert spotted the bear first and shouted for everyone to get in the car. Diane's children ran. Robert grabbed them and moved toward the vehicle, screaming at Diane to follow. Diane froze. She stood completely still, watching the bear move through the tree line, telling herself it would veer off, that it hadn't seen them, that it was just passing through. It wasn't. As the grizzly locked onto the food spread and began moving directly toward the table, the bear huffed loudly and popped its jaws, a warning display Diane didn't recognize for what it was. Her instinct wasn't to run, it was to protect what was hers. She lunged back toward the picnic table, grabbing at the birthday cake and the cooler, shouting at the bear to go away, still convinced she could salvage the situation. The grizzly charged, covering the distance in seconds. Diane dropped the cake and turned to run, far too late. The bear struck her from behind with enough force to knock her face first onto the ground. The grizzly bit into Diane's upper thigh with full force, the kind of bite that doesn't release cleanly. When the bear shook her and disengaged, the damage to the tissue and vasculature in her leg was catastrophic. She raked her claws across Diane's shoulder as she retreated, then moved back toward her cubs and into the tree line. The attack lasted no more than 30 seconds. Robert had reached the car with the children and was honking continuously. The noise, combined with the bear's instinct to return to her cubs, ended the attack. Diane was conscious when Robert reached her, but the blood loss from her thigh was severe and accelerating. The femoral region had taken the worst of the bite, and the bleeding could not be controlled with pressure alone. Robert called 911 while applying his jacket to the wound, but the terrain made ground access slow, and a helicopter response to their backcountry location took time. Long enough to matter. Park rangers arrived on foot first, applying emergency trauma dressings and doing everything they could to slow the bleeding. Diane was still conscious when they reached her, her voice faint, asking about her children. By the time the helicopter landed in a nearby clearing, she had lost consciousness. She was in critical condition throughout the flight, her blood pressure dropping despite IV fluid started on scene. Diane Crawford died in the trauma center several hours after the attack. Surgeons had worked to repair the vascular damage, but the blood loss had been too extensive and the delay too long. While Diane's family began the process of understanding what had happened, across the country in Florida, another entitled parent was about to discover that some educational experiences teach lessons no one survives to remember. It was May 12, 2014, and the morning humidity hung heavy over the boardwalks of Everglades National Park, where Carol Brennan was about to transform a children's educational trip into a nightmare that would haunt 28 fifth graders forever. Carol Brennan, 40-year-old homemaker and PTA president from Miami, who had volunteered as a parent chaperone for her daughter's class field trip. Carol had earned a reputation among teachers as someone who questioned every decision, demanded special accommodations, and frequently threatened to go to the superintendent when things didn't go her way. The Palmetto Elementary field trip covered Florida ecosystems. 28 students, 4 teachers, and 6 parent chaperones traveled to the park for a guided boardwalk tour through sawgrass marshes and cypress swamps. Before departure, park naturalist David Chen gathered all participants for a mandatory safety briefing that Carol would later ignore with fatal consequences. David's presentation was direct. The Everglades housed thousands of American alligators, apex predators extremely dangerous to humans. All participants must stay on designated boardwalks at all times, never approach the water's edge, and never attempt to touch or feed wildlife. The group began their tour along wooden boardwalks elevated above the swamp, at the observation platform overlooking a pond where several large alligators basked. David explained their behavior and capabilities to the students. Carol grew impatient with the viewing angle, wanting better photographs for her daughter's science project. While David answered student questions, Carol noticed a low water access point at the base of a maintenance ramp where the boardwalk met the shoreline, a section used by park staff, marked with a chain and a posted warning sign. Another chaperone called out for Carol to return the moment she ducked under the chain. Carol dismissed her, claiming she was fine. David turned and saw Carol crouching at the muddy shoreline, phone extended toward the water, and immediately recognized the danger. Here is what Carol did not know, and what David had explained on the platform minutes earlier. American alligators are not reactive predators. They are patient ones. A large alligator can remain completely motionless beneath the surface for extended periods, body temperature regulated, oxygen consumption minimal, invisible in murky water from less than 3 feet away. They don't chase, they wait, and when they strike, the movement from stillness to full bite force takes less than a second. A 12-foot male alligator was positioned in the water directly in front of Carol, somewhere between 6 and 8 feet away, invisible beneath the murky surface. The alligator struck with shocking speed, exploding from the water and clamping onto Carol's right arm. Bone cracked instantly as Carol screamed. The alligator's momentum dragged her forward off the muddy bank and into the water. She went under immediately, her scream cut off. Students and chaperones screamed in horror while David evacuated the children and radioed emergency services. Once in the water, the alligator performed its death roll, spinning to disorient and submerge its prey. Carol surfaced once, gasping, her arms still locked in the animal's jaws. She managed a single, desperate breath before the alligator pulled her under again. The water stilled. Park rangers arrived 11 minutes later and called for dive teams and wildlife officers. The alligator was located and killed. Dive teams found Carol's body lodged beneath a submerged cypress root 80 feet from the attack site. The medical examiner determined Carol died from drowning combined with traumatic injury and blood loss. The investigation confirmed she had deliberately bypassed a marked barrier, left the designated boardwalk, and positioned herself at the water's edge. Despite explicit instructions, 28 children witnessed a preventable death because one adult refused to follow the rules. Carol's fatal decision to ignore expert warnings was devastating. But what happened when a photographer's arrogance met one of Africa's most dangerous animals pushed the consequences of entitlement to an entirely different scale? It was October 3rd, 2018, and the African sun was beginning its descent over the A Safari Reserve, where Linda Peterson was about to discover that a camera lens offers no protection from 14,000 pounds of charging muscle. Linda Peterson was a 27-year-old semi-professional photographer from Seattle who had saved for 3 years to afford a luxury African safari. She arrived with expensive camera equipment and an inflated sense of her expertise. Linda had a documented pattern of dismissing professional advice, arguing with guides, and insisting she knew better than people with decades of experience. Her guide was Thabo Nkosi, a professional with 16 years of experience and a spotless safety record. Trouble began immediately. During the morning drive, Thabo spotted lions resting under acacia trees and stopped at the required 50-meter distance. Linda complained that the distance was too far for close-up shots and demanded he drive closer. When he explained park regulations, Linda accused him of being overly cautious and threatened to complain to his company. On October 3rd, during the afternoon drive, Thabo located a large bull elephant feeding near a waterhole. The terrain was uneven. A dry riverbed forced the vehicle to approach along a narrow track that left them closer than the standard 100-meter guideline, stopping at approximately 50 meters. This bull showed clear signs of must: temporal glands streaming fluid, aggressive posturing, and warning displays toward the vehicle. Thabo stopped and explained that the bull was in must and extremely dangerous, emphasizing that no one would exit the vehicle under any circumstances. Linda complained that even 50 meters was too far and accused Thabo of ruining her expensive safari. Must is a periodic condition in bull elephants, driven by a surge in testosterone that can reach levels 60 times higher than normal. During must, bulls become unpredictable and highly aggressive, not just toward perceived threats, but toward anything in their environment. A bull elephant in must weighs up to 14,000 pounds and can run 25 miles per hour. At 4:37 p.m., while Thabo was explaining elephant behavior to other guests, Linda stood up in the Land Rover and climbed over the side, dropping to the ground. Despite Thabo's immediate orders to return, Linda ignored him and walked toward the elephant, raising her camera. The bull's ears flared wide. He shook his head in a sharp, violent arc, throwing dust from his trunk, the last warning signal before a committed charge. He raised his trunk and trumpeted, body shifting into an aggressive stance, head high, tusks forward. Thabo shouted. Linda took another step forward, adjusting her camera settings. The first movement wasn't a full run. It was a violent forward lurch, the bull's entire weight shifting onto his front legs as he committed. Then he was at full speed. Linda turned and ran, but the distance was nothing to an animal moving at 25 miles per hour. The bull struck her at full force, launching her through the air. She landed hard on rocky terrain. Linda tried to move, her body not responding. The elephant, still agitated, moved over her, massive feet striking the ground around and against her before finally turning back toward the waterhole. By the time rangers reached her, she was unresponsive. The medical examiner determined Linda died from massive blunt force trauma, crushed internal organs, punctured lungs, and catastrophic internal bleeding. She likely lost consciousness within moments of the initial impact. But Linda's fatal photography session was nothing compared to what happened when another woman's misplaced confidence met a predator that doesn't negotiate. It was June 27, 2018, and the Texas heat shimmered over the grounds of Austin Wild Animal Sanctuary, where Sharon Mitchell was about to discover that enthusiasm doesn't replace expertise when facing a Bengal tiger. Sharon Mitchell, 46, was a pharmaceutical sales representative who had volunteered at the sanctuary for 3 months. The facility housed rescued exotic animals, former pets, and circus animals. Sharon specifically requested working with big cats despite having no professional experience, and staff quickly noticed problematic patterns. From her first week, Sharon caused problems. She argued that tigers should receive more human interaction, insisted that safety barriers created unnecessary distance, and suggested that staff were cruel for not allowing closer contact. Senior keeper Marcus Webb documented Sharon standing too close to fences, attempting to hand-feed tigers in violation of protocol, and dismissing safety warnings. On June 27th, Sharon was scheduled for feeding under Webb's direct supervision. The task involved preparing meat and delivering it via secure chutes, systems ensuring keepers never shared space with animals. The sanctuary used a strict lockout-tagout procedure. Before any enclosure access, keepers were required to visually confirm via monitors that the animal was secured in its indoor holding area, then engage a secondary lock on the outdoor access gate, requiring a key held only by senior staff. The protocol had 2 independent verification steps. One could fail, but both failing simultaneously was considered nearly impossible under normal operation. Webb explained the full procedure to Sharon, walked her through each step, and made clear that no part of the process was optional. But Webb had noticed over 3 months that Sharon had a habit of watching how things were done and quietly deciding she understood them better than she did. At 3:15 p.m., Webb was called away for a bear emergency. He instructed Sharon explicitly to wait until he returned and not to begin the feeding sequence under any circumstances. Sharon waited 11 minutes. Bengal tigers are the largest of the big cat species, with males reaching up to 450 pounds and over 10 feet in length. Their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch, and their preferred killing method is a sustained grip on the back of the neck, compressing the airway and spinal structures simultaneously. What makes tigers particularly lethal in an enclosed space is their acceleration. Sharon prepared Raja's food and wheeled it to his enclosure. She checked the monitor. Raja appeared as a shape near the indoor holding area, and Sharon convinced herself that it was close enough to confirm. What she didn't know was that the camera angle had a blind spot near the indoor-outdoor partition, and Raja had moved into it. She found the secondary lock already disengaged, a staff error from an earlier shift, and interpreted it not as a warning sign, but as confirmation that the enclosure was ready. She had observed the process enough times to mimic the steps. She had never understood what the steps were actually verifying. She entered the enclosure. Raja was 40 feet away. The tiger's head lifted slowly, eyes locking onto her. There was a pause, a brief, terrible stillness, before Raja rose and began moving with the low, fluid motion of an animal that has already made its decision. Sharon turned to run. She managed 2 steps before the 450-pound tiger closed the distance and struck her from behind, driving her face first onto the concrete. His jaws clamped onto the back of her neck, the killing grip, designed to crush and compress. Sharon's screaming stopped within seconds. Webb returned, noticed she was missing, and found Raja on the monitors. The veterinary team responded immediately with a tranquilizer dart, but the first shot missed its mark, glancing off Raja's flank without delivering a full dose. A second dart was fired. The drug began to take effect, but sedating a 450-pound animal under stress takes time even under ideal conditions. Raja was not fully down. 34 minutes after Sharon had entered the enclosure. By the time staff reached her, Sharon was gone. The medical examiner determined she died from crushing neck trauma and asphyxiation. The extended time before sedation took effect had made survival impossible. She was 46 years old. But Sharon's fate was sealed the moment she stepped through that gate. What happened next, in the Arizona desert, shows that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the animal, it's the decision made in the moments after. It was September 9th, 2013, and the desert sunset painted the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and reds, where Barbara Henderson was about to learn that some shortcuts lead directly to disaster. Barbara Henderson was 58 years old, a real estate broker from Scottsdale who had built her reputation on never accepting no as an answer. She believed her 20 years of desert living made her more qualified than park rangers to assess danger. The Scottsdale Parks Department had organized a guided sunset nature walk through the McDowell Sonoran Preserve. 23 community members registered, including Barbara and her friend Michelle Torres. Jake Morrison, a park naturalist with 12 years of Arizona desert experience, led the walk. Before departing, Jake gathered the group for a mandatory safety briefing. He explained the preserve housed numerous venomous snake species, including western diamondback and Mojave rattlesnakes. Barbara interrupted repeatedly, complaining that the safety talk was taking too long. Jake continued, noting that multiple people were bitten each year due to ignoring precautions. The group began hiking at 6 p.m. Jake spotted a western diamondback coiled beneath a creosote bush, 8 feet from the trail. He halted the group to observe from a safe distance, explaining diamondback behavior and the dangers of its hemotoxic venom. Barbara complained that stopping for every snake would take forever. The group moved on. The snake had been handled without incident. Barbara filed it away as confirmation that Jake was being excessive. The group reached a series of boulders where the trail passed between them. Jake warned everyone to stay on the trail and avoid rocky areas where snakes sheltered in crevices, noting rattlesnakes were most active during sunset hours. Barbara had fallen to the back with Michelle. She decided the trail route was inefficient and told Michelle she knew a shortcut through the rocks. Michelle urged her to stay on track, but Barbara dismissed her concerns and stepped off the trail. The Mojave rattlesnake is not the largest venomous snake in North America, but it is widely considered the most dangerous. Unlike the western diamondback, whose venom is primarily hemotoxic, destroying tissue and disrupting clotting, the Mojave carries a dual-action venom. Its hemotoxic component attacks blood vessels and prevents coagulation, while its neurotoxic component targets the nervous system, potentially causing respiratory paralysis. Barbara stepped off the trail picking through the boulder field. She stepped directly onto a coiled Mojave rattlesnake hidden between rocks. The snake struck defensively, sinking its fangs into her right ankle above her boot and injecting a significant dose of venom. Barbara screamed and jerked backward, stumbling over the rocks and falling hard. Michelle shouted for Jake. The group ran back to find Barbara sitting between boulders, clutching her ankle, her face already going pale. A single clear bite mark was visible above her boot, the surrounding tissue beginning to swell almost immediately. Barbara looked at the bite, then looked at Michelle, and said she thought it was fine. She'd read that most rattlesnake bites were dry bites, she said. She didn't feel that bad yet. She didn't want to cause a scene. She asked Michelle to help her back to the trailhead, and they'd drive to urgent care. Michelle hesitated. Barbara was already standing, insisting she could walk it off. Jake reached them within 2 minutes and immediately recognized the swelling pattern as aggressive, not a dry bite. He radioed emergency services 7 minutes after the strike. Those 7 minutes and the remote location of the boulder field would prove to be the difference. Jake told her to remain calm, applied a loose pressure bandage over the bite site, and monitored her condition. Barbara's breathing was rapid, her voice shaking as she asked whether she was going to be okay. The swelling was spreading fast, up her ankle and toward her calf, and she was already complaining of intense, burning pain and nausea. Emergency services arrived 23 minutes after Jake's call, hiking to Barbara with a stretcher through terrain that slowed every step. By then, Barbara was no longer asking questions. Her responses had become fragmented, single words, then nothing. Her leg had swollen dramatically, the tissue at the bite site already showing early signs of necrosis. Her clotting was visibly compromised. The pressure bandage had soaked through. paramedics started IV fluids and called for helicopter transport to Phoenix. By the time Barbara reached the trauma center, the envenomation had progressed significantly. Physicians administered antivenin and began aggressive supportive treatment, but the coagulopathy was severe. Her blood was no longer clotting effectively, and internal bleeding had begun. There were also early signs of respiratory compromise, consistent with the neurotoxic component of Mojave venom in a significant envenomation. Barbara Henderson died in the early hours of September 10th, approximately 9 hours after the bite. The combination of delayed help-seeking, remote terrain, and a full venom load from a large Mojave rattlesnake had pushed the envenomation beyond what treatment could reverse in time.